Thank you, Marco. So let me start with two stories. So back in 2013, it was like 10 years ago, I met Mr. Wu, who's an independent documentary filmmaker in China. He started his vernacular memory plan and grassroots studio project in that year. So his project's trying to integrate the visuals, audios, and everything into memory. And his project document the history of the Great Famine in Chinese history from 1959 to 1961. So around 20 participants were villagers, filmmakers, and volunteering students. They were actively involved in documenting this still very sensitive part of the Chinese history. So the journey of recording and documenting the individual stories and memories through visuals gradually become a quest for a renewed identity, a sense of collective identity, which is an alternative understanding of history. I was very surprised at the time, after 15 years absence, knowing that, projects like this with a very passion for documenting the vernacular memory of this still very sensitive part of Chinese history. And later that year, the second story, I was sitting at the public history conference. It was held in a newly renovated Suzhou Museum. So I was observing, and it's all public residents. They walk into the conference hall and sharing the stories about how they interpret their family histories and the community histories. I was shocked to see their emotions running so high. And for some reason, I was thinking about this quote from Raphael Samuel, and history is not the prerogative of a historian. And in some ways, a social form of knowledge. But anyway, so I was kind of surprised, well, how come such a diverse and dynamic social form of knowledge is so embedded in the Chinese public memory, remains an intellectual blind spot. So I was trained in the US, and I worked on my first book on preserving urban landscapes in Toronto, Canada. So I just realized that my training and experience in North America doesn't really prepare my work in China, where we talk about a shared authority, but what about in the culture that the authority is not often shared and memories are like just censored? So working in Asia in the last some years and sort of reviews the complexity of public history in many ways, I was not expecting here in the United States. And so we probably all know that as a subfield of public history. Public history started in the United States back in the 1970s, and it sort of followed the predictable disciplinary evolution. We have the program and the journal and national organization, and later from National Council on Public History, we have the International Federation on Public History. So you see, but as Thomas was mentioned, all of us are working in university, not in academy. So that means our effort to establish public history is still firmly within the academy, within the history, the discipline of history. And so my work in China and probably other Asian countries takes on a very different trajectory. And I just realized that issues there follows a very different pedigree of inquiry, and it defines disciplinary boundaries. So since the beginning of the 21st century, and we have the waves of revolutions in media technologies, which transform the public history landscapes permanently and across cultures. And so history became visibly thriving outside of academy. And I believe public history globally gives an inflection of such a change. So it blurs the disciplinary boundaries. That's why we have the complex projects Tanya mentioned this morning, like, working with a group of people from other disciplines. And in many ways, it echoes sort of a cultural anxiety that traditional history doesn't really live up to the increasing educated public demand for a more sophisticated products, historic products. So in a way, I see a greater and more proactive public participation of the audience in the history making. So as in the Chinese culture, you probably all know that ordinary people's history is not really well represented in the official grand narratives. And so the public history sort of meets the field, sort of initiate and mobilize that kind of grassroots intention of writing history and making history. So the very unconventionality reveals something that here we're not just talking about the cosmetic change of greater public participation. It's just the entire history-making system has changed in Asia. So here, it's more than just the greater access to the variety of materials and artifacts and all of that. And I just realized that it's something more permanent and it's more fundamental, because it's about history production and all the way to history consumption at the end. So history, historians and the public become not just the consumers of history, but also the producers. So they're prosuming history. So, so my argument here is that modern public history at its core is a verb, it's a present tense. I should add an ing. So it's a public historian. So history in making. So that's, and it usually happens in a space. It's fluid, encourage the open structure, and you have all those interconnecting dots, and they interact and with each other, and it generates the kind of surprising complexity which we would never see before this digital revolution. And so I see this kind of fundamental change across borders, across different cultures, but in the last 10 years or so, just because I'm on the ground working with public historians, public educators, and museum urban planners, museum site interpreters, and archaeologists, and anthropologists on the ground across cities in China. So that's why I feel I can talk with some kind of like confidence in how this works in Asia. So that's, I'll bring into the idea of complex public history to China, where I have been working. So you'll have, so you'll have the my upcoming book. So this book explains the idea of complex public history. It takes the reader on the journey of a public history in China, and writing it has been quite a journey. So I try to engage the general public, and I try to work and understand public history in China, and try to establish public history as a discipline at a college and university levels. So the core analysis of my book is really about how public is involved in this production and consumption process, or what I call presumption process. So here you will see the different aspects of public history at a different scale, so including historic consciousness at a national scale, and oral history, family history, genealogy, public environmental history, museum interpretation, performance, and reenactment, and historic video games. So all those chapters are project-based and context and independent. So just try to present the complexity of history making in China. So here I'm just going to talk, if I have time. So I might do 2 projects. And
five minutes more.
Oh, okay. So that's okay. I can talk a little faster. So, so this is a museum and the public urban landscape project, which I was involved with very higher ups and in the museums, which is the top museums in China. And what we did essentially is trying to incorporate the local residents' voice in the museums, which is typical you see here in the West. But what we did is that, we started to try to integrate this conflicting interpretation of the same urban history into the public, and I try to tease out that complexity and present that in the public space with the help of the digital media. And that comes with a lot of negotiations with the higher ups, with the leadership, and luckily they are open and to really, incorporate different voices, not on the other cases that I've been working on. So it turns out we did a great job in renovate those. One exhibit in the hall we call the urban landscapes of city of Chongqing, and we try to incorporate some of the very different voices from, say, for example, the witnesses of the air bombing, you know, at the end of the World War II, and how residents kind of see that part of their normal life, and you know, and integrate that into the bigger like urban landscapes, which is still like dotted around this landscapes of Chongqing. And so that project is kind of trying to integrate, you know, this public voice and sort of interacting with the artifacts and how that generates a different kind of complexity and in interpreting historic landscapes from multiple, even conflicting perspectives. And the second project I have done, which I should talk a little bit about, is the historical performance, which is not a subject that's studied by any public historians in China yet. So you have the state pageantry, you have the typical like kind of historical reenactment, especially war reenactment. But the project I take on is working with a very grassroots volunteering group with no official support. So that demonstrates one aspect of complex public history is a self-organizing, very top-down, but they have this momentum to get emergent, and they try to interact and then self-generated, but self-organized and all of that. So a group of reenactors, they just organize themselves with social media and then try to interpret, try to reenact the Ming Dynasty. And for some of your understand Chinese history is that, you know, so they try not to do this. The Qing Dynasty is somewhere like far around. It's not dominated by Han and Chinese. So Ming is the last, you know, dynasties that are dominated by Han Dynasty. And they feel this is part of we try to bring that Han culture, revival that part of Chinese history. But what they did is that they did the diligent research and they try to accurately reenacting that part of the history. And so it's all, they self-funded and with like, you know, no central authority, but they did that, you know, on a totally volunteer base, which I did establish an oral history database with some of the organizers and participants are running that every year. And just things like this performing history, and you're going to see they actually talk about many of the questions, and you know, so for example, how are you going to reinterpret part of Chinese history in public, in a stage, in performance? And the second, how are you going to challenge? We talk a lot about the official narratives, and they don't really challenge that up front. They challenge by avoiding some of the official regulations and all of that. They try to bring the public and mobilize the public to get them involved in the public performance. Before I end, I do want to talk about oral history. I remember back in 2017, when one of the prominent oral historian, Paul Thompson, revisited China, and he said this. He was saying, so here, you know, our Western work is still primarily at this point audio recording, because we have the huge audio archives, whereas in China, it's at the cutting edge of the audio vision. And I've been working with some oral history archives, including the Cultural Revolution archives housed in Shanghai and in Beijing. They're trying to utilize some of the computational science and try to incorporate some of the, build up the better database for people to use instead of just, the transcription and, you know, so to make this underutilized oral history archives and try to make it like, you know, use, incorporate the emotions, incorporate the audios and sounds, establish a different cross-referencing systems and establish new platforms and try, so people can actually access it. When I say this, is not including the oral history of the Cultural Revolution, but other oral history archives. We're doing this less politically sensitive, but that's the direction we're trying to take. And I think just because we actually didn't have the face of doing the recording, the cassette part, because, our history is pretty, like recently, Chinese culture. Once we start from digital version. So that gives us a new kind of a starting point to really build up the archives and interpreting and cross-referencing and stuff like that in that regard. And I think it's most exciting. And I feel that's where we can see digital humanities, public history, and also collective memory building sort of like emerge together. It's emergent, and it's self-organizing, it's interactive, it's intergenerative, and it's complex. So I leave you with that. How am I doing this time? Oh, I have 1 minute. Okay, good.
No, to be exactly, you have 2 seconds.
Oh, that's it. Okay, so I'm going to end there, and so and read my book.